They just came on now. Let's try get closer to the stage. Sorry. Excuse me. Hi there. Thanks a million.
Do you want to go on my shoulders?
What?
Sorry. Do you want to go on my shoulders?
Yeah, that'd be unreal. Thanks. Wow.
3 celebrates connections made by music this summer. Find out more at 3.ie/music.
Welcome to the Empowerment Hour podcast, your digital classroom where individuals across all ages, backgrounds, and career levels tune in to get their weekly dose of inspiration and motivation. It's where passion and purpose intersect. I am your host, Nancy Ruffin, the self-proclaimed Latina Oprah and your very own personal success coach. My goal is to help you discover your purpose and take inspired action so that you create a life where you feel fulfilled and empowered. So if you're ready to start living on purpose, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. You are tuned in to the Empowerment Hour, and I am your host, Nancy Ruffin. Hey guys, this is episode 91. We are almost at that 100 episode mark. You know, I've been thinking if I should do something special for that milestone. If you guys have any ideas, let me know. Maybe we'll have a huge party or celebration or something because, you know, I love to party. In any case, I hope you guys have had an amazing week. I hope that the week has been productive and that you've been staying focused on crushing those goals. We literally are less than 4 months away to the end of the year. So if you've been slacking, this is the time where I need you guys to buckle down, stop playing. Like, time is flying by and we need to get you guys focused and ready so that come December, you can look at your vision board and be like, yes, I did that. I did this. And then you start off, 2019 with a clean slate and with new goals. And then you work on smashing those too. If you've been tuned into my IG this week, then you know I made a recent announcement. Meaning me, Stephanie the Life Architect, BLC New York, and Cynthia Branch have partnered up to bring you guys one of the premier events of 2018. Okay? If you haven't checked it out, make sure you head on over to my IG page. Or better yet, make sure that you head on over to my website, www.iamnancyruffin.com. Subscribe to my mailing list, and you will get the exclusive VIP pre-sale link for tickets, as well as a 20% discount code. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this event. It is entitled Boricua Morena, a conversation about sisterhood and colorism. And the goal of the event is really to create dialogue amongst our Black and Brown, aka Latina sisters, and the things that have historically divided us. And, for those of us who have grown up in the inner city, in New York City, or in cities like New York, we are very much integrated, in schools, in our neighborhoods, in our buildings, and how we live. There really isn't any separation, amongst us, other than I would say maybe some cultural things. But even culturally, I think that we struggle within ourselves when we start talking about race and identity and Black and white and all of these different things. And so this event is actually designed to kind of bridge some of those gaps, tear down some of the myths and stereotypes that we have come to believe about one another, and really start working towards solutions that are going to unite us and bring us together, because ladies and gentlemen, we are so much stronger together than divided. And when you consider the current, political climate that we're living in, when we have a president who is doing all he can as is to divide us, now more than ever is so important for us to really stick together and just learn a little bit more about each other. And so that is what this event is really designed to do. We've already started selling tickets through that VIP exclusive link. So if you want to be in the room, if you want to be a part of the conversation, head over to my website, subscribe to my mailing list, and I will get that email out to you. However, if you don't want to do that, then tickets go on sale to the general public on August 25th. So then you can also stay tuned to that. I'll be posting it all over my social media platforms. And I'm sure that Stephanie and Cynthia will be doing the same. And if you're not already following them, make sure to connect with them. These are two amazing women who are doing some really phenomenal work out there in the field of healing, in the fields of self-love, of empowerment. These are women who have not only done their own work, but they have invested in themselves as far as really being true to their craft. So they're certified, they're licensed, they're not just out here on social media throwing titles of life coach or therapist and haven't really done the work necessary that's required to help others heal, right? Because you can't help heal others if you yourself are not healed. And I have seen so many quote unquote life coaches, business coaches, empowerment coaches who have not done any of the work on themselves. So come on, sis, how are you going to teach someone else when you yourself haven't done it? So Cynthia and Stephanie, they are the real deal. These are women that if you need to do your own self-work, make sure that you reach out to them, because they will absolutely provide you with the tools and resources that you need. I'm also resuming my one-on-one self-discovery, purpose-finding coaching in September. And for those of you who have worked with me in the past, thank you. Thank you for trusting me to guide you on your journeys. And for those of you who have yet to work with me, if you want to find out more about what the program entails, then just shoot me, a DM, shoot me an email, and I will absolutely answer any questions that you may have. The program is a 6-week program, so it's 6 1-hour sessions. Usually it's weekly, but of course, I will work with your schedule. So whatever works best for you, we can absolutely accommodate that. What else is happening in the fall? I'm also starting to book and schedule my calendar for fall events. So if you are in need of a speaker for your Hispanic Heritage Month event, a keynote speaker for any of your business events, if you're a principal at a school and you need me to come out there and talk and inspire the children, I can absolutely do that as well. I can also, facilitate any workshops that you may be interested in, whether it's vision board, whether it's empowerment, whatever you need, I got you covered. I'm also available for conferences, for speaking on panels. You can find a list of my services also on my website. So again, make sure you head on over there. There's a ton of information for you guys. www.IamNancyRuffin.com. And if you have not already subscribed to the podcast, what are you waiting for? It's 91 episodes, guys. You know you want this. You know you need this. Every single Monday, I am coming through your speakers, through your smartphone, through your PC, and I am giving you that good. I am helping you start your week off right, inspired, motivated, so you want to subscribe because you do not want to miss none of the good stuff that's happening here on a weekly basis. So make sure that you head over to Apple Podcast, subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, and if you love it, please leave me a review. And if you don't love it, you know what? I'd like to know that as well. If there are any areas where you think I can improve, or if there are topics that you want me to touch upon that I haven't yet, let me know. This is, an open forum. I am here for the good and the bad, because I am not above doing better, right? So, and I do this for you guys. So whatever way that I can improve the content that you guys want and want to hear, then absolutely let me know. But without any further ado, I'm excited because this week joining me on the podcast, I have New York Times bestselling author and award-winning slam poet, Elizabeth-Acevedo. And I will tell you guys, chatting with her was like chatting with my homegirl. The conversation was so great. It was so easy. Elizabeth is just as beautiful, on the inside as she is on the outside. A really down-to-earth, around-the-way girl. She's like someone you would have grown up with, right? She's probably very similar to one of your homegirls now. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Elizabeth-Acevedo.
Hey guys, it's your girl, Nancy Ruffin. And tonight I am super excited because I have a special guest with me. And joining me is none other than the incomparable Elizabeth-Acevedo.
Hi!
Elizabeth is an Afro-Latina Dominicana who hails from New York City. She is an award-winning slam poet, a New York Times bestselling author, and an educator whose work has been published in various literary journals. She's appeared on TV, she's given TED Talks, she has traveled all across the world performing her work. So it's an incredible honor to have her join us tonight. And welcome to the Empowerment Hour, Liz.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks so much for having me.
So, for those of you who may not be familiar with Elizabeth, aside from her huge success as this New York Times bestselling author, she is one of the baddest spoken word performers / slam poets that has ever graced any. Okay, I just have to because I know you, Liz, from being a poet. Mm-hmm. That is where most of your work, I think, historically has centered on poetry. Right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So first, let me congratulate you on the huge success of the Poet X. Like, it's huge. Did you ever imagine it would be received in the way that it has been?
I think when it's like being a performer and you're writing a piece and you're like, I think this is a really dope poem. And you're imagining like an audience might really like this line, an audience might respond to this. Like you're in your head writing for yourself, but you're also anticipating that this is going to be heard, but you have no idea what that reaction is actually going to be. And I think for me, this was a huge leap of faith into a project that's completely different than anything else I've ever done. And I had no idea how it would be received. It's a novel, but it's in verse, so it's told through poems. It's young adult, so it's geared toward teens, whereas the majority of my work has been more towards adults or, college aged and up. And so I didn't know is the answer. The answer is no. I think I knew there was something special, that this was a story I wish I had read, that these were characters that I loved, but I didn't anticipate just how widespread from the very beginning, right? The book went to auction from jump. It was kind of like, okay, this is going to be different than I thought it would be.
The book, as soon as I from the jump, like from the first page, it grabs you. And I think for me, what was so interesting was that it was in verse. And so even though it was a novel, it was still so true to who you are, to your roots, to the fact that you are this, amazing poet. And it came across in the novel, and it had such a great rhythm to it, and it's like wow, because it's hard enough to write like a traditional novel. I can't imagine what the process is like to write, one in verse, where it's almost like a long poem, from beginning to end. What was that process for you?
I mean, it was hard because novels in verse exist, and I read a ton of them, and I liked a handful, right? Like there's not as many. There's no how-to guide to how to write a novel in verse. There's a how to write poetry. There's a how to write fiction. That middle ground, which is unfortunate because I think a lot of my work is hybrid work. It's how can this work on the stage and the page? How can this do this and this? And so for me to say, how can this be a novel and also maintain the integrity of a poem and of poetry was hard. And at some point you're like, okay, this is 400 poems. Like, and I don't know how to weave this together. I don't know if this character is developed. I'm in this girl's head and I'm just talking about like what she thinks for 20 pages. And I'm like, oh wait, there has to be a plot. Like something has to happen. And so it was a lot of like trial and error and printing out every page and rearranging it almost like you would a poetry book, but then having to remember to keep a tight pacing. It felt in a lot of ways like I was teaching myself how to write something new. And I had written 2 novels before this one. I started this book, I got to page 40 and didn't know where to go or how to do it. I wrote 2 other novels in prose and then realized that my voice was stronger through verse and that was what I had to return to. And so that, Poetex kind of came from trusting that instinct.
I think that it's so important. You touched on this idea of voice, right? And I think especially now in this day and age where there's such a push on, tapping into your authenticity and just really owning who you are and being proud. And I guess, how have you been able to stay true to who you are and to your voice, despite where your experiences have taken you throughout your life?
It's helped me to get out of the limelight, right? That I came up through poetry when I was young. I was a teenager. Urban Word was this organization that was massive. There were a lot of folks who from age 18, 19 were touring, were on HBO Poetry Jam, were in the light. And I think it was a great decision for me to actually leave New York and kind of work on my craft quietly by myself with a new audience that wasn't the fan base I was used to, that wasn't used to my voice, that wasn't used to who I was. Right? There are not a lot of Afro-Latinas in DC. There are not a lot of Dominicans or Caribbeans in DC. That's not the population of Latinx folks that's here. And so for me to be telling those stories, it was like, okay, how do I make this resonate and still be true to myself and also reach people? Can I do that? And so I think part of my continuously trying to navigate new spaces pushes me to have to refine my voice, because it's either you compromise into what that space thinks they want, or you arrive with the voice you have and say, this is what you're going to learn to like, because that's what I'm going to give you. And so I think it was helpful for me to leave. And that's not to say like throwing no shade at, my contemporaries, or had I stayed in New York, I think I would have kept grinding, but I think it was helpful to kind of just write a ton of stuff that no one was hearing, work on projects quietly. And then when I came up for air, people are always like, how do you have so many projects? How are you always coming out with books or videos or new poems? And I think it's because I spend a lot of time in quiet mode and then like come out in bursts and then get back and grind and refine what it is I'm trying to do.
That's an excellent insight. And the reason I asked the question, I think especially for young girls, right? The audience or the demographic that the Poetex is catered towards, that age group is so what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're just so impressionable, or they're still trying to find themselves and identify themselves. And a lot of times they shift from who they are, right, to fulfill what they think others perceive that they should be. And so the fact that you were able to own who you were, own your voice, and take yourself out of a environment that you were comfortable in and familiar with, and plant yourself somewhere totally brand new, still owning who you were, kind of almost reconfirms, right, that it's never a bad idea to just be who you are. You're going to grow and flourish no matter where you are, as long as you're true to yourself. And I think that your story and your journey, and you actually just speaking about that now, is really a testament to that. And so I guess I want to shift a little bit here because, of course, your career started as a slam poet, and Xiomara, we see she finds her own voice in the Poet X, through poetry and through almost the edging on of, one of her teachers. So I guess how similar or how much of Xiomara's story is based on your own real life experiences?
I laugh. This is like, I think people want to map on, like figure out like what's the parts of the book that like I lived through. So I get this question often. So that's why I'm laughing. I'm going to connect it also to the previous point you made, that one of the things I love about the way that Xiomara's story ultimately came to be is you see her fail at a lot of things. You see her fail at personal relationships. You see her fail at attempting to communicate with her parents. You see her fail at like her defense mechanism is to fight and to be violent and to be vicious, right? And in a way that she recognizes like this is how you gain respect where I'm from, and that is being true to herself, right? But she also has to try new things in order to show other sides of herself. And I think when I wonder about that age group, like you were saying, and being impressionable, like we're all taught to imitate, right? That's how we learn how to walk. That's how we learn how to talk. You imitate other people. And it's learning the line of like, what are the things you borrow? And then what are the things you're going to have to invent to be the woman you want to be? And I think a lot of young people keep borrowing from other people and trying to create a personality. And then they push off and they push off the parts of themselves that they actually need to be expressing. They don't know where that line is of like, okay, I'm actually not going to find this outward. This is all inside, right? And so Xiomara's story is one about that. In terms of autobiographical, I think a lot of the emotional truths of this story are my own, right? That I grew up kind of feeling like I was growing up in a very strict household and had very clear rules on the kind of young woman I had to be, right? You don't have a boyfriend, you don't hang out, you don't stay on the block unless you have past this time. If my parents were out playing dominoes, if they were hanging out, I'd be out, but después de las 10, you're in your house, right?
Yep.
Or you're doing a program, you're playing basketball, poetry, pero no di que tal hangueando.
Right. Yeah, because there's only trouble in the streets, Exactly. I think for a lot of, in our culture, I think it's just, that's how we're raised. The reason why I asked the question is because I know that, as writers, although everything that we write about may not be from our own personal experiences, but we borrow, we take parts of our own story or from things that we've seen, other family members go through or friends. And I just thought that there were just a lot of similar parallels in her story, just from what I know based, on the surface, about you, the fact that that you are a poet, that you grew up, in the Heights, that you come from a strict, Dominican family, which were all things that we see in the book with Xiomara. So that was, and it was something that one of my book club members, wanted to ask. So
no, and I'm not shaming the question in any capacity. I think it's hard for me to answer, right? Like my husband the other day was like, you need to stop fronting and just acknowledge that. I mean, autobiographical. And I think because I know all the nuances of like what I had to fictionalize and what I had to push, and in order to create a plot, what kinds of scenarios I had to make. A part of me is like, it feels like I'm cheating the process to say that I just wrote the story of my life, because it was so much harder than that. I wish I could have given you more years of high school. But
I totally get it.
but for sure, what you're saying, I do think that a novel, especially a first novel that is very similar to one's life, is like a quilt, right? That there are pieces I grabbed from, like my best friend's name is Scotty. The best friend of the book is Scotty. That there were people I wanted to pay honor to and homage to and say, like, I know you're going to understand the journey of this book. And so I'm going to put pieces of us into this book. I'm going to put our stories into this book so that we can see ourselves, right? And so for sure, there are things that, my best friend read and she's like, yo, I remember that day. And I'm like, thought I made that up. Wait, that's a memory? That's crazy.
Girl, it's nothing like your friends to help you, right? To help you remember the things that you quote unquote, forgotten.
For sure.
So one of the things I guess I noticed about the book is that it really touches on so many topics. I mean, you talk about religion, sexuality, your culture is, heavily infused in this story. There's also, things that point, to gender and the different expectations, that we grow up with, whether you're a girl or whether you're a boy, and body image. There were just so many different themes that kind of ran through the book. And so I guess, why was it important for you to also, not to include just some of these, but like all of these things, especially as I mentioned, with the demographic that this book is catering to? I think that these are all really important topics that teens, struggle with at one point or another. And so I guess, why was it important for you to include them in the book?
I think when I'm writing, I don't make a lot of conscious decisions about themes or like what I'm going to grapple with. I had half a story, like 40 pages of this young girl who discovers spoken word and realizes she's a poet, right? And she has a difficult family life. That was the first premise I had. And then I had a couple of pages of a project that I didn't know what it was going to be, about this young girl whose mother is super Catholic and she has an aversion to saints. Like she can't see crosses. Like she has this like super fear, right? And I realized that I was really writing one story, that this was going to be a stronger story if I had both of these undercurrents, right? These double plot lines running through it. And I had to strip back some of the things and add on in other places. But that it was never my thought, like, I want to make a statement about religion. It was never my thought, like, I want to make a statement about sexuality or, how Latinx folks deal with sexuality. That I think for me, it was all about, like, what is the authentic truth of this narrative? What is it that I know to be true based off of the people I come from, the community I have? And then as an outsider, when you're revising, of course, realizing like, oh, I'm going to push this a little bit more and I'm going to ensure that this point comes through a little bit clearer. But I didn't know the points until the book was done, right? Like it wasn't until I got to the end and realized like, oh, this was her journey. Right. That then I know like, oh, and here are all the things. And people have found things in the book like I didn't intend, right? They're like, oh, this is one of the themes, la la la. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. That's amazing.
It's so interesting though how that happens, right? Because you sit down to write the story and then so many other things come out of that, right? Because, again, story is, what you say, but then there's also those like reading between the lines of the things that you don't say that leaves it open for the reader, to kind of put their own twist on. So, okay, so I want to just shift a little bit, because someone wanted to know, and these are the writers of my book club, how was the Poet X discovered? Like the book, what were the steps that you took for it to be published?
I went very traditional, like there was no... I'm not sure it's quite a glamorous story. I started the book in 2012. And when I realized that I was writing fiction, I went on Twitter and created a list of agents and editors and different people in publishing and kind of followed to get a sense of like, what is children's literature grappling with right now? And that was at the very beginning of the We Need Diverse Books campaign, right. Which became a huge movement of how do we create diversity in children's publishing, right? And so I'm at the very beginning when I decided to write this book, people are now starting to talk about what are the narratives that aren't a part of the canon, that aren't being pushed forth. But I don't have anything yet, right? Like I only have a couple pages here and there, but I realized, I'm not the only one who's felt like our stories aren't being told. And so I'm just following all these people and getting a sense of like, whose politics do I like, who's publishing, authors that I appreciate. And I sent out a manuscript. I wrote a fantasy novel. It was like 400 pages about a little Dominican witch from New York fighting demons. It was a mess. I send this to my dream agent. I'm like, the book of my heart. Your dogs. I spent like 2.5 years working on this thing, sweat, blood, and tears, writing on the train late at night, like crazy. And you know, she read it and came back and was kind of like, I don't think this is as strong as, you know, some of the work I've seen. Like, I've seen your videos. I don't think this is the story. I don't know.
Right.
And she basically was very nice about saying like, nah, I can't take you on as a client. And it broke my heart. Like, I literally wept. It was just like, you know, this project I poured myself into. And then I picked myself back up and I wrote a chapbook and worked on my poetry and came back after a little bit and said, okay, well, what's the next thing then, right? Because maybe I need to take time from that and let me try something else. And so I jumped into X and I worked on the X. Probably when I jumped back in, I was, I think, in a very different place in terms of, you know, I know I can finish a manuscript. I know how to create a plot now, and I know how to push through and see it to the end. And so it took me about 4 months to finish the manuscript. I sent it to the same agent. She offered me representation within a month.
Wow.
A month later, she sent it out to editors. The book went to auction. It was a 7-house auction. And so different publishers were trying to acquire it. And, you know, at the end of the day, I went with HarperCollins and my editor, Rosemary Brosnan, because she's just an OG. Like, she just knows the game. She's been about it for a long time. You know, when everybody else was jumping on the diversity bandwagon, she had already had, you know, so many authors of color under her belt who she, not under her belt, right, but who she worked with and partnered to bring their stories to life. And so for me, she felt like someone who knew it and who stood by her authors, right? Who stood by them.
That's important, because you don't want people to then come and try to have you change your story or change who you are.
And to keep it very real, right? Like, that I knew that there was a way that this book was going to be pegged. Yeah. You have this poet who slammed before. It's a book about slam. Diversity is the hot topic right now. It's written in verse, which when it's done well, people love, because they say a lot of reluctant readers, you know, schools are really open to it. So I knew that it was very easy for my body and my labor to become a commodity. Right? Like, this is the thing we can sell. And so, you know, all the editors were lovely, but I feel like Rosemary, to me, didn't feel like she was trying to sell me. It felt like she was really like, you know, one of the things she said was, I'm here for whatever books you're trying to put forth, right? If you want to do prose, if you want to do a different project, if you want to write fantasy, like, I'm here, in a way that I think folks were going to want me to crank out the same, all right, now another book about a poetry club. You know, like, it becomes a novelty. And I didn't want to be that.
So are we going to get a part 2 of the Poet X? Or is this just, you know, this? You know, we want to see Xiomara and how she grows up, and we want to see her journey.
You know, I never imagined another book. I think, to me, her story felt complete. Like, you get this sense of that she found what she needed to become who she needs to become. And you might not see who she becomes, but that's okay. I think there's so many other stories that, like, feel so large on my heart right now.
Well, yes, you just recently announced your second novel, right? I saw it on your Instagram. Is there anything that you can tell us about the new book?
Yeah, for sure. I'm like in that world. Well, I'm working on something else right now, because I just turned that into final copies to my editor. But it's Imani Santiago, who is half Puerto Rican, half Black American, is set in Philadelphia. So a lot of departures from the first book. And it's told through prose. She is a chef, and it has a little bit of magical realism, right? So her food evokes certain emotions and memories in people. And she doesn't always necessarily believe that same magic, but she realizes that when she feeds people, like, it changes how they see themselves and how they think about who they are, right? In a way that really empowers her. She's also a teen mom. And so she's navigating her senior year of high school when everyone else is being told, follow your dreams, do what you want, you know, like, you know, go out into the world and conquer. She's getting messages that are kind of like, well, you know, you got to quit and get a job and take care of your kid. And so she's trying to navigate, like, what does it mean to be responsible, but also to show your child that you can dream big, right? That a child is a part of your existence, but it's not necessarily an obstacle. You bring your kid with you. And so, you know, I had to really navigate some sensitive topics and trying to tell a very honest story. You know, I've worked with teen mothers. I, had a lot of teen mothers that I knew. And so trying to honor that story.
Yes. And I love, this is why we need writers like you telling these stories, because these are not stories that are told. We don't ever see, or not traditionally, not enough of, the teen moms that we know exist because we grew up with them or we are them, and they should have, they say representation. We want to see ourselves in the books that we're reading.
For sure. And I read a lot of stories growing up. I feel like there was that like push for, when these characters would find out they're pregnant and then they have this decision to make. Like I read a lot of those growing up, and those still exist. They're still coming out. Like, someone finds out they're pregnant, and do they get an abortion? Do they keep the kid? Do they give it up for adoption? And, it just hit me like, I never read a story about like a girl who just kept the kid and who's raising the kid, but like that's not the central. What happens after?
Yes.
Like, okay, the decision was made, and now what? Like those girls exist. They have lives. They go on and like, pursue all kinds of adventures and dreams. And so where are their stories? I think fiction tends to kill them off. Like that's the decision was the most important thing about this person's life. And I'm like, nah, like that's not fair to all of the things that they accomplish and do after that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm sitting here because, I've read tons of those stories as well, but you're right. You never hear or read the story about what happens after, because really the growth happens after the decision, right? The decision becomes the turning point of that person's life, whether they decide to keep the kid, whether they don't. And it's like, what happens after? And so when is this book slated to come out? Because I'm excited for it.
May 2019.
Oh, good. That's one day after my birthday. So this would be a great birthday present for me.
Yeah. Well, I will be doing events, all throughout the country. I'll be on tour for that book. So hopefully I'll get to New York, Jersey area.
Yes, absolutely. And I missed you. You were here. I think the Dominican Writers Alliance had brought you. You were at I forgot, some center uptown. I can't.
Dominicana.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, I couldn't make it because of my childcare issue, but I definitely, I want to check you out the next time you are, in the New York tri-state area. Well, yeah, the New York tri-state area. But one last question, because I know that we've almost reached our time and I don't want to keep you any longer. What advice would you give for upcoming writers, besides write and read a lot, because we know that as writers, we're supposed to do that. But as far as, conferences that they should attend or groups to be a part of, what advice would you give someone who is writing and wants to have their work published?
I think that you should always be thinking about how are you throwing your work at a lot of different walls to see what sticks, right? That I think one of the reasons that I was able to do all the things I did is because I participated in slams while trying to write fiction, while getting my, MFA in poetry, while working on my thesis. Like I didn't know what was going to work, but I was going to try it all. And I think sometimes as writers, we become very limited and like, well, I'm just a poet, so I'm just going to write poems, and I'm a quote unquote page poet, so I'm just going to submit to publications, as opposed to like, well, what if you read it out loud? What if you did this? What if you tried collaborating with an artist and seeing how that works? And so I think a lot of prongs is important. So on the inward side, I would say look at your community, right? Who in your community already has a writer's group? Who has a book club? Who has a writer's workshop out of the library? Like what near you do you already have? Because sometimes you want to invent the wheel and the resource is already there. And it's just looking for people to come through with new blood and new energy. And so looking inward. I think in terms of outward, there's a lot of amazing, national organizations, Cave Canem, Callaloo, Canto Mundo, Kundeman, who are all focused on writers of color and the voices of writers of color, right? And so for me, it was important I was in very white academic spaces, to leave those spaces and then be with non-white academics and realize, where is my work fitting in? How is my work in conversation with my contemporaries? What are people doing that I didn't even know was possible, right? So that opens up a lot of my thought process and my thinking. And I will say, because I know you said don't say like read and write, but
well, because the question that I got, that was what they said. Like, I know we have to read and write, but you don't realize that you really have to read a lot. And write a lot.
It's also like people don't read as writers. There's a difference between reading a lot and like taking notes. You know what I'm saying? Like the only thing I could read and don't take notes on is romance novels. That's where I can completely lose myself. Anything else I'm reading, I have to be writing in the margins. I'm thinking, what is the project that this author took? You know what I'm saying? How did they get here? Oh, I'm like in the middle of my feelings, and then I have to stop and be like, wait, why am I in my feelings? What did this person just do to create emotion? How did they create tension? What was it about this dialogue? And a lot of writers don't read that way.
You know, and I think that that's where, you know, for anyone who's a writer, if you can get into workshops or residencies, I mean, I know that for me, the first time I attended VONA, that was where I really learned how to read as a writer. Like it really taught me what that meant. And until you get into those spaces with people who have done it and know what to do and they could teach you, you know, you're always going to kind of be searching for that thing. So you have to really, you know, put yourself in the spaces that's going to allow you to grow, both as an individual, as a writer of color, you know, because it's different in every space that you get into.
For sure. I completely agree. And I didn't mention VONA, and I'm sorry that one slipped my mind, but I think that all of these organizations that push you to be critical of other people's work, and not in a malicious way, right? That I think that there's a way to give critique that is forcing you to think about like what is a project and is it successful? And if not, why not? And sometimes it's not even for the other person, right? It's for you to learn what is it that you consider success and effectiveness in writing. And then you have now a new standard to raise your own work to, because you know what it is that you want from a piece. And I'll say just one last really practical thing, because I really do believe in practical advice. It was helpful for me when I first wanted to start publishing to think about who are all the poets that I love and then look where they published. So I look, every single book I read, I look at the back at the acknowledgments, or I look at the acknowledgments in the front if it's a book of poetry, and like, where were these poems published? Who were the people who thought these poems were successful and put them in print? Because if I think my work is in conversation or similar to these poets, then that gives me a way in to start reading those magazines, reading those journals, and then submit for publication, right? That so often you feel like you don't know where to put your work.
Right.
And the first place I ever published was the Acentos Review. I went to Gato Mundo, and I didn't even know that this review of Latinx poetry existed, you know, was being curated at the time by Reina. And it was like this magical moment of like, oh, wait, this is a space for me. And I know that because I know these poets and their work and these editors. And I think that when you become more familiar with poets and find where's their lineage, right? You fit yourself into that lineage as well.
Yes. Well, Elizabeth, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me tonight. It's been really insightful, and just thank you for sharing your insight and your advice and just your life, because as creatives, we share a lot of ourselves. And so I appreciate you. My book club girls appreciate you. Shout out to Urban Classy Book Club. And yes, the next time you're in New York City, I'm going to make sure that we all go and support you. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that so much, Nancy. Thanks so much for having me and for, hosting this hour for folks to feel empowered. So appreciate you.
All right, my love. Take care and continue success.
Appreciate you. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Elizabeth. How dope is she, man? I've been following Liz and her career for an extremely long time. And, for those of you who have been following me for a long time, you know that I'm a poet. At heart, I'm a poet. The first book that I ever published was a book of poetry. And it's always going to be my first love, regardless of the different avenues that I choose to go to and in the different ways I choose to use my voice. Poetry is something that is really close, in my heart. And when I see Elizabeth and what she represents, not only for myself, but for many women, many people of color, many Latinas, this is someone who looks like me, who comes from where I come from. When she tells her stories, I can relate to them because they are the same stories that I have lived through. Culturally, there's something to be said when you see others achieve immense success. And for someone like me, who is also a writer, who also strives to one day be on the New York Times bestsellers list, she inspires hope. And not only does she inspire hope, she also inspires possibility, because I can look to her, someone who looks like me, who comes from where I come from, who speaks the way that I speak. If it was possible for her, then it's absolutely possible for me. And so she is my mirror. And, Liz, thank you for being so vocal, for being so passionate, for sharing your gift with the world. And this is something that I say all the time. Our gifts are not for ourselves. Our gifts are to be shared with others. Our gifts are given by God, and we do him a disservice when we don't share the gifts that he's given us. And so for those of you out there who are struggling with your own passions, with your own dreams, if you feel like the thing that you want to do is impossible because no one else has done it, and you don't know how it's going to come to pass, and you don't have the resources, or you don't have the time, or you don't have the this or the that, or whatever excuse that you keep on telling yourself for not going after your dream, I need you to take a chance on yourself. I need you to not give up on yourself, because if there's no one that has done what you want to do, then you need to be the first to do it. And you need to be the inspiration for someone else who's going to look to you and say, they inspire hope in me. They inspire possibility. You have to be that one. So with that said, make sure you take care of yourself, take care of each other, and go out there and crush those goals.